This is the iZeeker iA200, a 4K dual-screen action cam from iZeeker, who was previously known as Apeman. This is on the starter level of action cams with a basic 4K 30 resolution, image stabilization, and a touchscreen. Today, let's check out some video quality and talk a little bit about this camera. Included in the box is the same basic kit of mounts and accessories that has been with all other iZeeker cameras that I've tested. There's a couple batteries, mounts, stickers, adapters. Here's a general overview. I'm just blasting through this part because, like I said, it's the same as other cameras. They're all decent quality, feel sturdy, fairly robust. The camera itself, in terms of build quality, well, it's made out of plastic and it is not waterproof without the additional waterproof case. Included in the box, thankfully. The back of the camera has the touchscreen, the top and right side have buttons, the left side has the microphone, USB-C and micro SD input, front has the secondary non-touchscreen, and on the underside is the very basic battery door. It's not hinged or anything, it just comes straight off. At least they've included a screw thread for a tripod mount, so this camera can be mounted directly to any tripod or tripod-like accessories. This camera feels super lightweight even with the battery installed, and that's in part because of the lack of waterproofing, the lack of shock resistance. The main camera body is not durable. To add durability, the additional case is needed. So now the most important part, video quality. Let's look at 4K video first of all. "4K 30 with the image stabilization turned off is true 4K, and it's comparable with other action cams in the sub $100 price class. Colors are a little bit on the warm side, and in some situations details do get a bit crunchy, but overall, with the image stabilization turned off, the video quality is decent enough to call it 4K. I always like comparing resolution with other cameras I have on hand, so here it is, 4K 30 versus my smartphone's ultra-wide camera. The smartphone does have an HDR function which gives it the benefit of the sky not being blown out, but the iA200 is decent enough for what it is in terms of detail and resolution, especially check out the road signs, what the cars look like, that sort of thing. Thing is, we're not here for 4K 30 with the image stabilization turned off, we're here for image stabilized 4K 30. And turning the EIS on does reduce video quality. The video is cropped in quite substantially, and despite the camera outputting a 4K 30 file, turning image stabilization on essentially bumps the effective resolution from 4K to about 1440p. Again, a direct comparison with my smartphone just shows how much it's cropped in. First of all, it's basically like going from the ultra-wide camera to the standard camera on my smartphone, and 4K is on the right and the iA200 is on the left. The iA200 just can't keep up to the 4K of the much more expensive smartphone, admittedly. Let's quickly look at a couple other resolutions, starting with 2K. It's pretty comparable. Like I said, 1440p and 4K, these two resolutions are pretty similar on the camera. 60 frames per second mode though, it's not so good. 1080p 60, here we are, and wow. I don't know why 1080p 60 is such a struggle for these budget action cam brands, but few that do real 4K can also do good 1080p 60. This camera is not one of them. 1080p 30 on the other hand looks just fine, so again, I'm not really sure what's up with the 60 frames per second modes, but yeah, even turning image stabilization on for 1080p 30, it still looks pretty good overall. Speaking of image stabilization, let's check out how well the image stabilization actually corrects for bumps and jostles. We'll start with a pretty smooth road, just riding along casual, bike path, for example. The image stabilization is pretty basic. It's probably limited by the processing power of this camera, and if it is truly 6-axis, I'd be pretty surprised. It really felt like it was only doing a little bit to correct for bumps and jostles on rougher terrain. Even on the road here at 4K 30 frames per second, images are still a little bit shaky. I also did a bunch of testing at 1080p 30 because I was using this camera to commute with, like a bicycle dash cam, and I wanted to extend the battery life by using 1080p mode instead of 4K mode. And at 1080p 30, the image stabilization actually seemed to be quite a bit more effective than it was at 4K mode. So again, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a bit of a limitation with the processor and the high resolution video. Speaking of surprises, there's one thing that surprised me about this camera in a good way, and that's the rear screen. Even in bright daylight, the rear screen was vibrant and sharp, very visible, and the touchscreen was accurate. It's funny how much of a good first impression that great screen made for this camera, because despite it being a pretty simple and basic camera with a lower end resolution, I quite enjoyed using this camera overall, because every time I needed to change a setting or recompose my shot, I was looking down at that screen and I was just like, well, yeah, this shot looks great on screen. The camera also does include an external mic, so let's go over some audio samples, first from the internal mic and then from the external mic. Whee! It's dark out. Not sure if I've said it yet, but this camera's rear screen is awesome. It's bright, vivid, and has lots of detail. Makes the image look great from any angle, even in sunlight. Honestly, most of these cheaper cameras have terrible rear screens, so this one being pretty good is a huge thumbs up for the camera. Alright, so iZeeker iA200 4K 30 with image stabilization turned on. I've got the external microphone plugged in now. We're also going to test the transition between bright sunny light like this and a little bit dimmer, darker gravel trail. See how that works for the image stabilization. Let's go. So one thing I noticed is that the metering on this camera is a little bit iffy. It seems to really favor overexposing. All right. I sure hope that the external microphone does make a difference for audio quality in this kind of situation. When I first did this test, I had the wind noise reduction turned on, and that resulted in very, very poor audio quality. There we are, now out into the garden. Another thing that I noticed in my first samples with this camera is that its metering seems to be a little bit wonky, favoring overexposure of bright highlights for details in the shadows. This is set to the camera's default, which is an average metering mode. Even center weighted or spot meterings tend to also bump up the highlights a little bit too bright. I found best video quality to be had when I set the camera to -half stop or -1 full stop. Let's quickly touch on still photos. The camera is clearly not a 24 megapixel sensor, I'd guess it's around 12, but the photos at 12 megapixels are pretty good overall. There's a decent amount of detail, colors are a little bit on the warm side similar to video, some highlights are a little bit hot, but yeah, in terms of overall quality, decent enough. Alright, so in summary, the iZeeker iA200. It's a pretty basic camera with a basic resolution. 4K 30, no image stabilization, looks pretty good. EIS bumps it down to about an effective resolution of 1440p, so it is still pretty good overall, but not quite as good as true 4K. 1080p 60? No. 1080p 30? Yeah, it's fine. I've been using the iA200 for about a month and a half and often as a bicycle dash cam. Turn it on, set it to car mode, and then it will loop and overwrite in 3-minute clip intervals. The battery lasts long enough to cover my 70 minutes of riding at 1080p 30 with the EIS on, so yeah, it's been pretty good overall. The one downside to this camera style is that it's not waterproof without the external case, meaning I can't use it in the rain, and putting it in that plastic case reduces the audio quality to basically nothing. Overall, the actual experience of using this camera is pretty good, even though the video quality is a little bit more on the basic side. Thanks for watching. I hope that this review was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe. I appreciate all of your support.